Hello again. I've spent the last hour or so reviewing a BBC children's programme, and pretty shocking it is too. I give a link to it in the description to this video. It is the first episode of Series 9 of Horrible Histories, which presents history for children in a vulgar, slapdash and inaccurate way. This episode is called Black British History. Now, I mention that because you would expect it to contain information only about history which was related to black British people. Sounds reasonable? I cannot detail every mistake and lie in the half-hour episode because it would simply take too long. I could speak for hours about this. Let me give you a few really awful instances, and I urge viewers to watch the thing for themselves. The fact is, this is not an educational programme at all. This is propaganda aimed at children and financed by, well, people that pay their television licence, really. Almost the first sentence spoken on that programme is a falsehood. The presenter says that in 1948, the British government invited black people to work in the United Kingdom. She then goes on to talk about the Empire Windrush. Nobody invited any black people to come and work in Britain in 1948, least of all the British government. In fact, they were horrified when people began arriving from the West Indies because there was nowhere for them to stay. Some of them ended up staying in an air raid shelter in Clapham. What actually happened was that the troop ship Empire Windrush was heading back to Britain. It had been in South America, by the way, and was heading back to Britain via the Caribbean. And there was hardly anybody on board. There was plenty of spare space. It struck the owners as a good idea to offer places on it for paying passengers to see if anybody wanted to go to Britain, because that way they could reduce the cost of running the ship. The advertisement, which appeared in the Jamaican Daily Gleaner several times in May 1948, read as follows: passenger opportunity to United Kingdom, troopship Empire Windrush sailing about May the 23rd, fares, cabin class £48, troop deck £28, Royal Mail Lines 8 Port Royal Street. That's it. Nothing about work at all, either in that or subsequent advertisements for passage to Britain. This is all part of the myth of immigration, which has built up over the years. We hear from people like Diane Abbott that immigrants came from the Caribbean to help rebuild Britain after the war. Others say that they, after being invited to Britain, they were made to feel unwelcome. Nobody invited them at all. This is sheer nonsense. Why did they come? The English newspaper, the Shield's Daily News, reported in June, after the arrival of the Empire Windrush, that a Jamaican businessman on board called Floyd Rayner said many of them would not stick the conditions and poor pay in Jamaica. In short, they came here expecting more money and a better standard of living. They were not invited, they came purely out of self-interest. The next section of the programme had a black guy dressed as a Roman soldier and talking about African soldiers being at Hadrian's Wall. This is another of those popular myths which are growing rapidly, and the BBC has already tried to spread this on history programmes aimed at adults, that is to say, pretending that there were black people guarding Hadrian's Wall during the Roman occupation. There was a unit of soldiers called the Aurelian Moors. They were garrisoned on Hadrian's Wall in the middle of the 3rd century AD. We know this because of inscriptions that have been found there. These men came from the Roman province of Mauritania, which is nowhere at all near the modern West African country of Mauritania. Same name, completely different places. the Roman province of Mauritania was actually on the Mediterranean coast of what is now Morocco and Algeria. This was territory which had once been occupied by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians, by the way, came from what is now Lebanon, and was then taken over by the Romans. There were also Berbers there, who were not black, by the way. They were light-skinned, light-skinned, but Mediterranean complexion. They looked like Spaniards or Portuguese. So these people were not black, and I have no idea why the BBC should include them in a programme called Black British History. American websites now refer to these people as coming from Mauritania, and they say that it's south of Morocco because they're getting muddled up between Mauritania, the Roman province, and Mauritania, the modern-day black nation in West Africa. And it ends up with the impression given that black people were living in Britain thousands of years ago. This is quite false. I give a link to an American website in the description to this video, which is pushing this untruthful line. Next in the Horrible Histories programme, we have a section about St Adrian of Canterbury. He was born in what is now Libya, and so was technically African. There were no black people living there at that time, though. Only Romans, Phoenicians and Berbers. St Adrian of Canterbury was not black, and the only possible reason for including him in a programme about black British history is so that the BBC could tell children he was African and leave them to conclude that that meant he was black. It's shockingly dishonest. As usual, don't take my word for all this. Look into the matter for yourselves and see what you think. There's plenty about all this on the internet and also, of course, in history books. Mary Seacole is shown tending British soldiers in a hospital a bit like Florence Nightingale. This never happened. The woman was never even in a hospital. She ran a restaurant and shop, of course, but there was no accommodation there, no beds. Another piece of deception. The reconstruction of Cheddar Man was shown, and children told that this meant that the first British people were black. I've dealt with this ludicrous, discredited business elsewhere. Nobody has the least idea what anybody's skin colour was 10,000 years ago, certainly not the BBC. I've only skimmed the surface of this really dreadful production. There is a good deal more that could be said about it. However, it ended with an entirely truthful statement, I'm happy to say. The presenter said, "Britain would not be the place it is today without the extraordinary contribution of the Windrush generation." That at least is quite true, although some of us think this is by way of being a mixed blessing when we consider all the changes wrought upon the country by immigration since 1948.